Rick Rubin just interviewed Rick Beato on his podcast, and it was pretty good. If you've been following Rick's channel for a while, there wasn't a ton of new information, but there were a few things that Rick said that highlighted for me one of the biggest problems in music education today. Let's listen to the clip.
And then you teach people, and it's almost impossible to teach them, Rick, about how do you play a melody over a set of chord changes. And most people will just run scales, and that just doesn't sound melodic. And then you teach them that, well, you play the notes of the chord, and that really describes them. So it's D minor 7 is D, F, A, C. But then you're just playing arpeggios, and that doesn't sound musical. So it's like, how do you actually make music and also make the changes? Making the changes are playing things that sound good over each chord, because you have things that are happening vertically, the chords that move along, and then you have the melody, which moves horizontally. And you have to teach people you can't really teach them. How do you play a phrase? It's like playing blues.
Yeah.
And you really kind of need to start with just developing motifs. I'm not sure that it can be taught.
In this clip, Rick is talking specifically about teaching jazz improv, but the same problem applies across music education, especially as it pertains to writing music. After all, improv is just writing music very quickly in the moment. The vast majority of music education is centered around teaching you tools to use, helping you make more interesting and sophisticated music. We call these tools music theory, and I've really been wondering for years if music theory is the right name for it. It almost boils down music into absolutes, treating it almost like a science. While that can be incredibly helpful and useful, knowing theory isn't actually necessary for making a compelling piece of art. Music education, whether it's formal conservatory education or courses you purchase from an influencer, kind of sells you this expectation in its undertones that if you just learn this hidden knowledge from those with the gnosis, you too can garner the fame and glory of the musicians you love. Now, they never say directly that you'll actually write better, or at least they rarely do, but it's implied that this will help you accomplish your dreams of becoming a successful artist. In reality, most of this education is teaching you how to become a good analyst or technician. Being an artist can include both of these things. These attributes can be incredibly helpful for providing you context on how to make great, compelling art. So I'm certainly not deriding them, but you can have all of these tools in your tool belt and still make pretty mediocre art. That's because these lessons are trying to quantify the unquantifiable. They're trying to introduce semantics to a world of semantic ambiguity. I've regularly been using this parallel since returning to my Catholic faith. There's a concept in Christianity referring to God as ineffable, which simply means too great or extreme to be expressed or described in words. It's our word for saying that God is incomprehensible in his totality. I might be willing to describe music as ineffable. I'd have to think a little bit more about that. But I'm not implying that it's remotely on the same level as the God I profess. But there is a clear parallel here between the ineffability of God and the ineffability of music. I mean, the parallel between music and spirituality has been around since we have any history to record with. We can use words to describe aspects of music, just like we can use words to describe aspects of God. But the moment we think we've perfectly, precisely, and accurately defined either of these concepts, especially with words, we know we have the wrong definition and are prone to fall into further error. Music, by definition, is soft and abstract. It's speaking with emotions. It's touching on meaning in a more fundamental way than words ever could, which many times communicates honesty and creates empathy with an audience. Turning that experience into math via modern music theory is never going to truly encapsulate that experience or show you how to elicit that response in others. It is a means that doesn't get you the whole way to the ends on its own. Those of you who've gone to a formal music school or taken a music course from an influencer, how many times have you heard music described this way by an educator? If you haven't heard this from an educator, why do you think that is? I'd love to know your thoughts on that in the comments below. You can quickly boil it down to you either got it or you don't, but I don't think that's completely accurate either. See, Rick is totally right that you can't teach that intuition to someone, but I believe that intuition can be learned and developed. When I was in music school, we had music theory courses and applied music theory, which was essentially ear training. But there's one layer deeper to the application of theory, and that's the emotional experience. On a micro level, just looking at how notes in a single chord or the intervals between notes in a melody make you feel. And on a macro level, trying to understand the emotional push and pull, tension and release of a piece of music. Both levels of analysis are important. Using the theory, you learn to organize these emotional effects, better reproduce them, and communicate these ideas to other collaborators. That is incredibly useful, but that is secondary to actually understanding them on an experiential level. You can technically learn all of the theory and have never heard a single note. You can look at the paper and pick up the concepts. The actual utility of the theory means nothing unless you understand the underlying emotional play. That is what Rick is pointing at. You can't teach someone emotional intuition. You can dispose them to developing it psychologically. A person can be more mindful of their emotions, and they can ask others how they feel about certain pieces of music, but you'll not be sciencing your way to speaking emotionally or spiritually with music. It can only be learned, not taught. As far as I've seen, not only is this crucial aspect of being an artist absent from music education, but most, if not all educators, know this reality exists and neglect to inform their students about it. Something about that seems a little underhanded. On one hand, they present a glimmer and sparkle of making great, consequential art. And on the other, they demystify the mystical and actually wind up pointing you in the wrong direction of making emotionally compelling art. There's a reason why the old saying goes, you go to Berkeley so that you can leave and forget everything you learned. It's not literally true. Producers and musicians use these tools to aid us in creating music every day, but they come very secondary to the raw emoting that is creating a compelling piece of music. Rick uses the example of teaching students how to navigate over chords using chord tones. This is a great tool for making your improv solos more musical. But then Rick says that it's just playing arpeggios and it actually makes it less musical.
You play the notes of the chord, and that really describes them. So it's D minor 7 is D, F, A, C. But then you're just playing arpeggios, and that doesn't sound musical.
I'm about to disagree with Rick here, not in what he's trying to say, but just the definition of musical. What Rick is actually saying is that it isn't compelling or interesting. And generally, in a modern context, I agree with that. Where I disagree is that playing chord tones literally makes it more musical by making the melody more orderly in context of the chords. The melody becomes less like noise and more like music. But that's not all there is to speaking truth through music. It's that unquantifiable magic that Rick and I agree you can't teach. This may sound totally lame, but it's true. You have to feel it. And if you're not good at feeling it, you have to learn how to feel it. As of now, no music school or influencer course is going to mention this, probably because they can't provide a solution to it. This mystical, magical intuition is something I wanted to be able to perfectly define. I wanted to know so that I could harness it. And I realize now that was a massive mistake. I was approaching music as if it were a science, as if man were merely widgets made up of complex but finite equations. And that is the exact opposite thing music is supposed to accomplish. In this same interview, Rick talks about how he likes to demystify the process of music, not quite the same thing. And as a matter of fact, I think it's extremely useful for helping people appreciate what goes into making an awesome record. Here's Rick on demystifying music.
I think a lot of people, including myself, when I didn't understand how records were made, when you think about it, if it's records recorded, the 1960s, 1970s, 80s, whatever, it was recorded on tape, and that tape started as a blank piece of plastic or whatever it's made out of, And then the music was recorded, and the things don't magically appear. Songs are written, they're recorded. Sometimes they're recorded over months, sometimes over years. And demystifying that has been one of the things that I like to do on my YouTube channel.
Now, demystifying may not be the perfect word to describe what Rick does on his channel, But he does give a peek behind the curtain to see what went into these legendary songs. And he takes time to focus on aspects of a record that can be taken for granted or completely missed. There is still a mystique to the whole process, even when you're in it and you're fully aware of what goes into making a great record. Rick Rubin opines here.
Demystifying that has been one of the things that I like to do on my YouTube channel. It's like, how is music actually
I'll say the more you know about it, the more you realize it is magic and it does just appear.
Now, it seems like Rick and Rick are disagreeing with one another, but I think they're actually talking about two aspects of the same process that are equally important. Beato, coming from more of an engineer and educator background, wants to emphasize just how much work goes into making an album, so audiences won't take music for granted.
So the strings at the beginning of the chorus start with this figure. That's a D add 9 chord, starting A, F sharp, E, D.
This segment I clipped was in context of how streaming music has affected culture, and Beato was emphasizing how he feels people are starting to take music for granted, a proposition I totally agree with. So, given the context, it makes sense he'd emphasize just how much work, knowledge, wisdom, and just dumb luck goes into making an amazing record. On the other hand, Rubin comes from a place of being more hands-off and gently curating the process through taste, helping bring forth the artist's best version of their natural and true voice. And in this regard, he is correct. There's a reason why the standard practice for professional producers and engineers today is worrying more about the performance than the technical proficiency in a recording. In the old days, before you could correct everything in post, you had to be both technically proficient and magically emotive. Technology today has advanced far enough that it's fairly easy to correct things like pitch and timing with essentially no lost fidelity. So the priority is capturing that thing that technology can't reproduce, which is a captivating performance. Those things can't be forced. They have to come from somewhere else. Both the mood in the studio and the mindset of the performers need to be such that those magic moments can emerge. Now, to come back to Beato's point, that magic won't emerge and won't be properly captured if you don't have the competency to pull it off. Tens of thousands of hours go into being ready for that one magic moment. Whether you're the performer who's been gigging 300 days out of the year for 5 years, or the engineer who's had to learn a lot of hard lessons making mistakes on other records. I think Rubin understands this, at least I hope he understands this. If I were to take him very literally, that all the preparation in the world doesn't matter at all, I'd love to propose a challenge to him. I'd love for Rick Rubin to take a group of 15-year-olds who've never played an instrument in their lives and make a world-class record with them. My guess is it would soon become clear just how important years of hard work and practice are. Again, I don't think Rubin is actually denying the importance of hard work and consistency. It was more to illustrate the point that it demands a balance of both of these aspects for the truly great records to get made. Again, I'm reminded of teachings from my faith, having a balance of faith and reason. Relying too much on one or the other will lead you into error, but having a balance of both will get you on the path to sainthood. You could think of all the hard work and technical know-how as the reason side of the equation, like how I compared music theory to being almost like a music science. Then you can compare being open and allowing that magic moment to emerge to the faith component, that level of surrender and allowing beauty to come forth, as opposed to trying to grasp at it too tightly and completely miss it. Letting go of a certain level of control and allowing the spirit to do his work. This is the root meaning of the word inspired, that is, to be breathed into by a divine or supernatural force. This combination of hard work that's both refining oneself through the fire and growing through experience and knowledge, think of it kind of like pruning a bonsai tree, and the openness to creativity, that is, being in touch with the intangible, ineffable truths that are deeper and simpler than words or concepts. That's how amazing records get made. I guess to bring it back to the central idea of the video, who is teaching this in music school? who's forwarding this idea in music education? These are some seriously important things to know as an artist or just a music maker in general. And they seem to be completely glossed over or like not even acknowledging that they exist. The philosophy of being an artist is probably more important than going to music school and practicing every day for 3 to 5 hours. My friend Adam Watts is a top echelon producer, writer, and music educator. This seemed right up his alley, so I wanted to know his thoughts. You watched the interview with Rick and Rick.
The Rick.
You watched the Ricks talk about music together. What was your first thought when Rick Beato was talking about the challenges of trying to teach students improv?
It was really interesting. Teaching melody and teaching taste are two of the real mysteries of the world, but it's not as much of a mystery as it might seem, I think. It's kind of like in sports, for example, a lot of what's there is a much more visible or testable, right?
Yeah, it's measurable.
It's much more measurable, and those things are less measurable. But to me, it's like you got to go back before and into the individual and into psychology to really unpack what's possible with people.
We're talking about in regards to like tapping into that inner musical kind of artist self.
Yeah, and there's so much to talk about with this interview. Because I found it really fascinating. There's so many cool little points, but like,
I agree. Yeah,
with the demystification and stuff. But it's like, yes, you can show people how to navigate chords and make things technically sound. Like, okay, you're playing from this chord to this chord, so make sure that you're playing inside of that chord and the notes of that chord into this one, and then which notes you chose and how it works horizontally. Does that become a melody that's worth hearing? Well, okay, how subjective is that? How objective is that? What's going on?
I think the analogy you gave me one time was the music theory skills like that are like handing someone a map, but you never explain to them how to get from point A to point B.
And why to get
and why for that matter. Yeah, the why. I think music is so surrounded by why.
That's really it. And the why is in what they touch on in that video, which is music as a language.
We'll quibble over that point, but I get what you mean. That's communication.
Yeah, we're gonna quibble over it, or you want to talk about it relative to this whole?
No, not right now. We don't have to right now. That's gonna be a completely different tangent.
It really isn't though, because when you talk about teaching melody, if music hasn't become a language on any level to you, don't even try to write a melody. If you don't know how to speak the English language, don't try to have a conversation.
Yeah, no, I am with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. Being so intimately familiar with communicating via this medium we use for emotion, like I would say probably exclusively emotion, that you need to be able to speak freely with it, if that makes any sense, without having to think about it.
Totally. We're having this conversation right now, and neither one of us are thinking about the alphabet.
One of the things that I poked at and I pointed at was the fact that in music education, it seems like sometimes people hide the ball on the fact that they're not actually teaching you how to be an artist. They're teaching you how to be an analyst and a technician,
right,
which are both extremely useful skills. I don't want to downplay that whatsoever. They can be super important, but they're not completely necessary to be an artist.
Right.
I think Bob Dylan exemplifies that. You know what I mean? And I'm not even a huge Bob Dylan fan, but you got to look at the man and understand he touched tons of people.
Yep.
You know? So like, what are your thoughts on the current state of music education and where you think you could see it possibly improving?
Well, the current state of it, I think, really is more about the what and the how. And it just really needs to be way more about the why. And I see why there's a problem there.
I see what you did there.
Ironically, because we have these tangibles, right? These tracks to get on, like, and it's easy to test for. It's very fine.
Yeah, especially for like people who need to be accountable or like hold other people accountable to actually giving the student something that they paid for.
Yep.
You know, and to make sure that they're actually performing you need something measurable. So like I can appreciate that too. That makes sense.
Totally. And, you know, I'm not some historian or anything, but I know that the current state of like university, well, not the current state, but the long-standing state of like university education as it relates to music, it has hundreds of years of like pedagogy that's rooted in classical music. It's been very codified, and popular music, even though there's relativity there and you're using some of the same alphabet or whatever, it's like the complexity is in a different space. When you press play on a popular music song, it's been written, performed, and recorded. So you have content, performance, and sonics unified together. And the complexity is in those three things and how they interact. And that is what a song is. And that's what we're not teaching, is like that complexity.
That's what we're not teaching in our current institutions.
In our current institutions, we're not teaching that the complexity is in the interactions between the content, how it's performed, and then how that performance sounds, and how those things are in harmony vertically and across time.
Which, like, just being an advocate for the audience very quickly.
Yes.
These sound like relatively soft terms, but there's a lot of richness that has been explored in each one of these by Adam. I've seen it myself.
Yeah.
So I promise you, he's not just like spitting bullcrap. Promise you. So the portion of the interview where Rick Beato says, demystifying these great songs, that's why I like having my YouTube channel. And then Rick Rubin kind of as a counterpoint to that and says, because Rick Beato is trying to say he doesn't want these like younger generation kids or people who've taken music for granted to just take it for granted that this stuff just appears at the touch of a button. Like a ton of work and heart and soul and intention went into this stuff. And then Rick Rubin is like, but man, like the more you get to know this stuff, the more that you do realize it does just magically appear. And I said in my video, it seems like they're disagreeing with one another, but I think they're actually talking about two aspects of the same thing. And I don't think, again, music education really captures or teaches any of that at all. But before we get to the education side of it,
Yep.
I want to know your thoughts on that interaction, because that definitely was like a striking moment to me.
Me too. That's huge. What they're talking about from two different sides. Rick Beato from very much a sort of like science of music. Here's what it is. Here's what it's comprised of. Here's
And there's so much to appreciate in all of the detail of the content.
Yeah. What's missing there for me though is talking about why. Why did it come to be? What were the decisions made? Because you can take the Mona Lisa and you can break it down. You can X-ray it. Here's what it is. But that doesn't help you create your own Mona Lisa. It helps you understand what the ingredients are of the Mona Lisa. But
On a molecular level.
On a molecular level, and it's like, okay, cool. Now we understand it.
Which as we've discussed, was one of the things I was running into that was a problem.
What I want to understand and what I want to help other people do is go, okay, there were tens of thousands of micro decisions involved in painting the Mona Lisa. Every one of those decisions was driven by a human being with a why. It's how you navigate all of those decisions, those brush strokes, those painting and then painting over, picking this color, picking this, all those things, and we do it in every art form. That's what gives us the final result. And if we try to reverse engineer art, we don't get closer to being better artists. We get closer to being better parrots. And
like being good technicians, which can be useful in certain situations as an artist.
It can be, but I would argue that I would rather have a pretty good technician who's a great artist than an amazing technician who brings no artistry to what they're doing. Because,
yeah, agreed. I wouldn't have agreed before, but I agree. I agree with you totally.
Because music's not a sport. Conversely, I think Rick Rubin is coming from the completely other side of the equation and going, look, he has an intuitive sense of how to set the stage for letting artists be the best of themselves, be the arbiter of tastes, being the person who holds the bar high, but also is never a jerk about it. And he doesn't have the static, but you don't understand. We use the coolest gear, or you don't understand.
We use the coolest gear.
You know what I mean? He could give a crap about all the things that we tend to start caring about more than what really matters. He comes in and goes, does it move me? Does it sound honest? And if the answer is no, he goes back to the drawing board. And if you don't mind, there's a line in that interview that stuck out to me like a sore thumb that I think.
Please, yeah.
Rick Beato's dad, he goes, my dad didn't say much, but one of the things he said was, if you can play like that, referring to Joe Pass, you've really done something with your life. And I think that notion, not just that sentence, but the life he had spent with his dad and probably the relationship that he had with his dad, that being verbalized, I think sent Rick on a path of like, well, then I'm going to freaking do that so that
yeah, totally.
So that my dad thinks I'm awesome. And to this day, I think that dynamic drives Rick to say playing great jazz is one of the best things you can do with your life because my dad said so.
I'm curious if he'll ever admit that, but I think you're onto something. Adam, thank you so much for joining me today, man. I greatly appreciate your time and your insight, sir.
You're welcome. Thanks, man. I appreciate you too, and I love that you're out in the YouTube land, trying to dig deep and connecting faith with music and purpose with music and purpose.
Oh, don't tell anyone that too loudly about the faith part.
Hey man,
that's a whole other conversation.
We all have faith in something, even if it's faith in nothing.
Casey, I am really happy that Rick interviewed Rick and highlighted this glaring gap in music education. And I'd love to know your thoughts on all of this in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. I love you. God bless.